Garrett, you're not just going to sit there awkwardly and stare at me until we start, are you? You're on mute. But I love when you don't know when you're on mute and you talk because you make the funniest faces. What were you saying?
I'm only looking at the square that you are in. Just picking
Oh,
things to make fun of.
there's a lot. There's a lot. There was a time when my hair looked better after a day of not putting gel in it, like the messy look, until it got to a certain COVID length. And now,
I hope there's so many people that are listening to this right now.
well,
We got 69 people already in here listening to your hair comments.
you guys want conditioning tips, just let me know because it's not working for me, but maybe you guys can give me some advice.
Well, hello, everyone who's joining right now. Welcome to, I guess, the Colin and Garrett show, right? But welcome to Reinventing Your Sales Mindset to Thrive Through Uncertainty. I'm Julie Cranston, Director of the SBDC at UCI Applied Innovation. I'd like to thank you so much for joining us today. Today's webinar is brought to you by the SBDC at UCI. The SBDC is funded in part by the U.S. Small Business Administration and the state of California. The SBDC is here to help you start, grow, and succeed in your business by providing no-cost expert consulting and training such as this webinar. In addition to our regular consulting on business management and equity funding, we also have been helping our small business clients understand and apply for SBA loans like the Economic Injury Disaster Loan or EIDL program, and also the Paycheck Protection Program or PPP loan. We can also advise on how to administer these loans if you've received them, so make sure to reach out to us if you need assistance. We have a hotline set up and additional resources available. The hotline number is 1-800-616-7232. If you're a tech or life science business, you can go straight to our intake form at sbdctech.org/contact. And we'll also put this information in the chat feature. A little housekeeping before we begin. Everyone is muted during the webinar. Tomorrow, the recorded webinar and a PDF copy of the slides will be sent to all participants. Colin and Garrett are going to present kind of a fireside chat today. So if you want to click on the gallery view in your upper right-hand corner of your screen and just set their squares on your in your Zoom window, then please do so now. There'll be Q&A at the end of the presentation, but please feel free to ask questions during the webinar by clicking on the Q&A box at the bottom of your screen. The chat feature has been disabled, so please make sure to put all your questions in the Q&A box. We may not get to everyone's questions, but we'll do our best. And if we don't get to any of your your particular question, please email hkhaled@fullerton.edu, and we will attempt to answer them and get back to you. Our program today will be presented by Colin Coggins and Garrett Brown, founders of Agency 18 and instructors at USC's Marshall School of Business, where they teach one of, if not the most popular class on campus, Sales Mindset for Entrepreneurs. Garrett and Colin, thank you so much for being here today. We're very fortunate to have you here to share your expertise in this uncertain time for small business and entrepreneurs. I'll let you say a little bit more about your background and leave the program to you.
That sounds great. Thanks, Julie.
Thanks, Julie.
So before COVID, we were actually scheduled to do a 3-part sales mindset series with SBDC, and we were really excited about that, and we still are. We will do that someday, but that is very much an in-person program where we were going to do some workshopping and put together some actual physical things that you could take away to build your sales teams, scale your sales teams. But when Julie asked us if we would do something virtual, we enthusiastically said yes. And the plan here today is to be a little bit different. So we want to really make it about you guys and make it a Q&A. So as Julie just said, please submit questions about anything as we talk here. We found in our class that a lot of the most successful class sessions that we have are ones where we just go off script and start talking to people about the startups that they're working on or the challenges that they're facing. And so the plan is to try to recreate that here after we talk a little bit about some of the stuff that we've been seeing during COVID, because Colin and I, as Julie alluded to, we work with a bunch of companies to help them build and scale sales teams. We mentor and advise a whole bunch of entrepreneurs, and we're also working on a book. And as part of that process, we've been interviewing salespeople, people with sales in their title, people without sales in their title. I'm sure we'll touch on some of that. But we've been hearing all kinds of stuff over the past few months. And we're really excited to kind of share our favorite parts of that and then really get into what you guys need. So if you've got questions about strategy or tactics or how Colin keeps his hair looking good when he can't get a haircut every week like he normally does, all that stuff is fair game. and we look forward to getting to that, but we'll kind of chat up a little bit before then. Did I miss anything, Colin, before we get into it?
You made fun of me in the first 72 seconds of this webinar. This is going to be a good one.
Won't be the last time. All right, cool. Well, I guess the first thing we'll do is we'll introduce ourselves really briefly. Sometimes that's hard to do, but today, because we want to get to the questions, we will try to keep it really brief. So I'm Garrett. I started my career actually as a lawyer, and I was representing entrepreneurs and startups, and it looked a lot more fun. So the first thing I did when I got the chance was get out of there and go to the other side of the table. Joined a startup in a sales role that I was with for about 3 years, took that to a small but kind of exciting acquisition. And then part of the team that had been a part of that company went on to found a company called Bidium, which I spent the next 5.5 years at as chief revenue officer. And that's where Colin enters the picture. He'll talk a little bit about that. But we took that company over the course of that 5.5 years to an acquisition by Google, which was very exciting. I then got to go to Google and work there for a little less than a year and kind of learn about their inner workings. And during that time, Colin and I continued to work with other companies in a variety of capacities and start to really put together this model of ours that he's also going to talk more about. And that led to a lot of speaking events like the ones we've done at UCI and elsewhere. It led to our class at USC, which we've been teaching for going on 3 years now, I think. It's called Sales Mindset for Entrepreneurs. We developed that class, and that's the only sales mindset class that we know of in higher education. It's also the only sales class, period, at USC. And then the book, which I mentioned, and all these things that relate towards our mission, which Colin will also talk about. So we've been doing a lot of that stuff. I also do some investing and advising. I invest through Tech Coast Angels here in Orange County, as well as direct for certain entrepreneurs. So I think that's the super fast version, and I'll turn it over to Colin. I try to get as much in as I can at the beginning because he's not going to let me talk much from here on out.
Number 2, ladies and gentlemen, number 2. I'm going to be really quick. I grew up really hating sales. And I'm not sure if it was my parents' fault or if it was just me being a product of the society that I grew up in. But there was this smarmy, just yucky feeling associated with a sales professional or just the practice of sales. And I went to UC Santa Barbara, and when I graduated, the only job I could get was in sales because that was who they were hiring at the time. And so, long story short, I was really bad. And I did what most people do when they're really bad. I go into like crazy blame displacement zone, and I just start blaming everyone from clients to my managers to training. 3 months in, they go, hey, look, by the way, like this might not be for you. You're going to be on a PIP, which is a performance improvement plan. And if you don't hit your number this month, you're fired. And so I knew I was going to be fired. So I just took a bunch of risks because I didn't care. And one of them was I was going to show up as the most real version of Colin for the next 30 days. Like I didn't expect to win. So therefore I didn't need to do what they were telling me to do to win because it didn't work over the last 3 months. And the realest version of Colin at that time was the opposite of who they were training salespeople to be. So I was asking questions I actually wanted to know the answers to. As opposed to searching for gold, for the roadmap to the sale. I was only laughing at jokes that were actually funny to me, not smiling and dialing. And miraculously, that was my biggest month ever, right? In fact, I broke the record that month. That job paid me $30,000 a month when I was good. And my dream job in PR was $30,000 a year. So it's a kid who hates sales, who figured out he was good at it by doing the opposite of what they tell you to do to be good at sales. And I was stuck because there is no 21-year-old kid that's going to leave 300 plus, even if they don't like their job. Fast forward, I became the youngest VP and the youngest director and the youngest trainer. And about 6 years later, I took those transferable skills and I got into software. And I ran a business intelligence data platform, which at the time was at the forefront of SaaS. Then I got into apps, and I ran with Funware, and then I was the SVP of sales for Mobile Roadie. That company got acquired by Intellectsoft. And then a recruiter called me and said, I know you think the entertainment industry is really hot, especially after this acquisition, but you want to know what's even hotter? I said, what? And he said, software security. And that's where I met Garrett. And so Garrett already told you we went to Bidium and we did something really incredible. And then Bidium got acquired by Google. And then I went on to have my first son, who you might hear in the background. And I did what most new dads want to do is I went out and I just tried to change the world. So I did some consulting for the LA Clean Tech Incubator, and I did some consulting for large scale government solar deployments in Beijing and in Mumbai. And then I came home and a recruiter reached out to me and said, I know you want to change the world. You can do it in your backyard. And so now I'm the head of revenue for a company called Change, which is an electric vehicle company. And so with that being said, I want to backtrack a little bit. So when Garrett and I met, there was one thing that happened for us to fall in love. And it was, like Garrett will tell you, it was love at first sight. And that's because Garrett and I both came from the weirdest places of really not anticipating, expecting, or even on any sales career trajectory. But we ended up in this place where Garrett was head of revenue and I'm sitting here being SVP of sales. And we said that we could do it differently, right? Like we were going to own what we thought was the best way to be a salesperson. And the immediate vibe that me and him really got on was the best salespeople in the world are actually the antithesis of what you expect a great salesperson to be. And that was an aha moment for us. And then we geeked out, right? Because we think that sales is art and we think it's a sport and we think it's love and it's the best part of the movie. And so we really spent those 3 years at Bidium really creating and building out this modality that was quite honestly the opposite of what everyone was teaching people to do in sales at the time. And it worked. And so then it scaled from there. And we started getting a lot of people that asked us to speak on it, and then USC asked us to teach on it, and then publishers asked us to write about it. And that was my really short version, Garrett, of my intro. And I didn't even talk about Puff Daddy. So you should give me some for that.
That's a long, short version, but I appreciate it. So I think but I think you've ended at a good segue because we want to get into some of this good stuff. So the whole modality of being the antithesis of a typical salesperson, not doing what necessarily a typical salesperson is taught to do. And that stuff works all the time, but let's talk a little bit about what we've been hearing in the last few months on how that is manifesting itself during COVID with sales teams who used to be on airplanes or in person, or at least all together in a room and are now all separate and individual and apart. Like what's the biggest thing in your opinion that we've been hearing about, the biggest trend?
Yeah. And I think it's important to level set. Like we need all of you to just be as vulnerable as possible because we're not looking at you. So just when we're having these conversations, like be honest with yourself because like, these are crazy times. And if you were a shitty salesperson, like before COVID, like all COVID did was just shine a light on how bad you are. And if you were a great salesperson prior to COVID, that you just had two options and we're seeing it. One option was, I'm going to stay true to myself, and this is going to give me the opportunity to show up as the most authentic version of myself. Or there's a line in the sand, and I have to feed my family. So even though I have the luxury of being good and being a great salesperson as a CEO, or a great salesperson as a salesperson, quote unquote, with sales in their title, I'm going to go feed my family however I have to. And I might end up resorting to horrible tactics that you didn't have to do before. So with that being said, I don't know who you are, but if we all acknowledge this is crazy, that's a great starting point because the most successful salespeople that we have seen flourish, like not only just like sustain, but like flourish during COVID are the ones that are hyper transparent, hyper vulnerable, like getting on the phone with someone and recognizing that it's a shared experience. Like for the first time ever, okay? The customer, not for the first time ever.
In a long time.
For the first time in a long time, the customer and the salesperson, whatever your title is, we're going to call you a salesperson because you are on the same team. You're living through a shared experience. So we're watching these salespeople like pick up the phone and say, I don't actually know how to have this call. Like, I don't know where you're at. You know what I mean? I don't even know if we're supposed to have this call. Like, I do understand you have a business to run and like, so do I, but like this is, like, honestly, I don't have the proper approach. Like normally, like I would set an agenda and we'd be good to go. And obviously, you know exactly what happens, but I'll say it for you. The customer goes, God, I'm so happy you said that. Like, me too. So like all of a sudden, we have permission to be vulnerable. Now let's get out of COVID for a second, okay? The greatest salespeople that we know are hyper vulnerable. Vulnerable to the point where one thing, Garrett, I think that we should just dive into this. One common thread that we've seen across all great salespeople is they talk to themselves in front of the customer. And I know that that sounds really weird, but some of you are thinking, oh shit, I do that. That's why I'm good. And some of you are thinking, damn, like when I get stuck, I just go quiet and I don't say anything because I want to be perfect. So I'll pause there.
And some people are probably thinking they have no idea what you're talking about, but it's
Right.
one of those things where, you know, when you get a new car and you see that car in the exact color driving all over the freeway all the time, then, you know, as soon as you get it, you start to see other versions of your car. It's the exact same thing. Now that Colin has pointed this out, you'll start to notice when you're talking to a great salesperson that they'll just stop and have a conversation. They'll stop and go, you know, I don't know why I said that. That's actually not true. This is what I was thinking, or this is what I meant. Like you'll see them stop and have that conversation with themselves.
It's almost, think of it this way. Like when we first, because we're interviewing the greatest salespeople in the world, we think like every day. And a lot of them don't have sales in their title, by the way. But what we've noticed is like they all are doing it and they don't even know that they're doing it. And during COVID, it's the best because we heard someone go, yeah, you know, like this is the new normal. And during this, wait, I can't believe I just said the new normal. I sound like that guy. Let me back up. This is, and it was eye-opening to us because everyone was doing it. So when we look back at it, we thought to ourselves, there's probably this element of thinking they can't be selling me if they're being that vulnerable and talking to themselves concurrently. Like he's not selling me if he's also like being vulnerable and talking to himself. Like at this moment in time, I'm not being sold. At this moment in time, I have visibility into like a very raw, emotional, vulnerable person. So you can't make
this is the part where I pause you, Colin, and I point out that it's really important to know when he's saying they're not selling me, this isn't like a sneaky tactic or anything like that. They're authentically just trying to have a conversation because any sales tactic can be weaponized. But the best salespeople, the ones that we're talking to, they're not weaponizing it. They're just truly authentic people that are doing that because that's how they think, and that's
it's such a
the
good
way
point.
that they speak to other people.
It's such a good point because the great salespeople don't actually know they're doing it. So they're not actually manipulating it. And it's a really good point that Garrett brings up because what we're doing is extracting all of these great things that they're doing that they don't know that they're doing. And that does leave room for someone to weaponize that. And so we do need to create that caveat that you cannot weaponize this because it actually has the opposite effect because you cannot act and be authentic at the same time. Like by definition, authenticity and acting are just, they're opposed. But I want to talk, go ahead, Garrett.
I just want to put a bow on this first point. You know, you talked about the beginning and being on the same team. And I think that's really important. If we were slide guys, the slide would say that this is an opportunity to be on the same team as the customer. And as long as we're kind of throwing in non-COVID related things that are just things we talk about and teach in general, a lot of the best salespeople that we're talking to and that we know, they use the fact that they don't know everything to do the exact same thing. So if a customer asks them a really tough question, they're able to go, you know what? I don't know the answer to that question, but let's go figure out the answer together. And suddenly now, instead of being in what the customer perceives as an adversarial salesperson versus me conversation, it's okay, now we're on the same side of the table. Let's go get answers and see if this actually works. It's really, it's an art, but it's a really important distinction.
It's so beautiful to watch it play out too, because it happens in different capacities. Like that's the most popular one, but you just see it all the time. Like someone asks a question and a great salesperson knows the power of, I don't know. There's this, so we're talking about like common themes across great salespeople. One thing, independent of COVID or not, is self-awareness, okay? The greatest salespeople we've ever met are not the best at overcoming objections. What they are the best at is realizing that they're saying something and it's not landing. They're self-aware enough to realize it and they can course correct real time. They're socially aware enough within the context of self-awareness to realize that the person on the other end of the Zoom call does not think you're listening. They actually think you're waiting to speak. They're viewing you as a knower, not as a learner, and they can adapt and pivot real time. So when you think about vulnerability and you think about the type of person that will talk to themselves in front of someone else, if you were the best salesperson that we'd ever meet, then you would know that I am self-aware enough to realize that what I'm doing right now is working. And the only way that I can sustain that growth and sustain this relationship is to show up as the most authentic version of myself. So rule number one, authenticity works, vulnerability works. COVID, you have the opportunity to be like yourself as opposed to try to fit yourself into a construct of who you're supposed to be.
I want to talk about that self-awareness during COVID because you mentioned it at the beginning, we're starting to see these salespeople who just do not have the self-awareness. And what we assume is happening is, especially at the beginning, it's starting to settle into a little bit more of a normal cadence now. But at the beginning, people were freaking out because customers weren't answering the phone. Everybody was kind of trying to figure out how to navigate working from home and the disruption to life. And so the worst salespeople were thinking, okay, I now need to reach out to 100 people that I don't know and that I haven't qualified, because if I reach out to 100, maybe 5 of them will respond and maybe one. It's a numbers game. And so that's why I don't know if you guys are seeing it, but we certainly are on LinkedIn especially, but even just with cold emails where people are reaching out with no idea what our business is or what our pain points are, just because it's clearly we're part of this big spray and pray campaign that they're doing. And so it's really in times like this where everybody's still figuring things out and where the bottom of the funnel is getting tighter because budgets are getting tighter and there's just different priorities. It's extremely, extremely important to be more focused on who you're talking to. And a lot of the best people that we're seeing, they're not doing the spray and pray. They're not just firing out emails and thinking it's a numbers game. They're instead spending more time on the front end to make sure that they're getting in front of the right people so that they have the value to bring. Because that's the only thing that people are responding to right now.
And it actually ties into another common theme that we've seen across a lot of great salespeople, which is we call it pathological optimism. And that's not to be confused with being naive. It just means that if you assume the person that you're talking to is going to buy from you, like if you assume they're already a customer, then you're already treating them differently, right? Like it's this whole, how do I have the mindset to be on the same team with my customer versus being on the opposite team? And so, when Garrett talks about taking a narrow pointed focus, that sounds great, right? It really does. But the reality is that we know during COVID, that means that your sales cycles are going to be longer. It means that your opportunities are going to go down. It means that your prospects and your lead to opportunity ratios are going to go down. So all your sales velocity metrics are going to show you that you're going in the wrong direction, right? But if you have the faith or the hope, right, to stay in it and have this long-term focus, then what you end up doing is you end up creating meaningful relationships, and you don't have to be the salesperson now because nobody wants you to be the salesperson now. Like what someone wants is for you to be the value add person. And we cringe when we say the word value because so many not great salespeople have bastardized that word, for lack of a better word. Hijack, that's a better word. But if you think about it, like if you can have faith that you're going to get to the other side, right? The best thing about really bad salespeople is it's really clear contrast when you talk to a great salesperson. So like the great salespeople, the great CEOs, the great heads of marketing, the great sales engineers, the great engineers that are selling as well. Like we're talking about small businesses where you have 7 different hats, but sales and revenue is going to be the engine that runs it all. Like you have an opportunity now more than ever to distinguish yourself from the rest of the pack. But that is going to require you to have patience. In fact, so much patience that what we've seen work really well during COVID is giving away shit for free. And I wish I could see your faces right now. It's like, because it's like, yeah, like tell me something I don't know, Colin, or what are you saying?
But there's an important qualifier there. It's not giving away everything for free. It's erring on the side of long-term success. So because you've done the work on the front end, like I was talking about, because you know that ultimately this particular customer is going to see the benefit of whatever it is that you're offering, and whatever. You've identified them as a great potential customer. You're doing things to err on the side of long-term success. So the bad salespeople right now are discounting because they go, okay, well, if I discount, then I'm going to close more deals and I'm going to get closer to my quota, even though numbers are down. But the great salespeople, they're discounting when it's appropriate. They're changing payment terms when it's appropriate. They're, adding on features if that's relevant when it's appropriate. And they're doing that only in cases where they're looking at it as an investment in the long-term success, because this isn't going to last forever. And so they're looking at the other side, and they're not saying, everything's wrong right now. How can I kind of survive this? They're looking at it as, how am I going to thrive when it's over?
Yeah, we see it play out all the time. There's advice that we give and part of our curriculum that we teach around this concept. So we believed in it before COVID. We've just seen it work when implemented right during COVID. The idea of partners versus customers, for an example, right? Like, I don't need customers. Like right now, at this stage in the game, like I don't need customers. Like I need partners. Like I need someone that's going to have a seat at the table, that's going to contribute, right? That's going to give me enough data using my product where I can shape the future roadmap of this company, of this industry, of this business within the eyes of you, because I think that you're a representative of my larger demographic, right? So I'm not giving away something for free in order for you to do nothing. Like I'm actually asking for a bunch of work from you, but in return, right? Like I don't need customers. Like this is not a money conversation right now. Like this is a partnership conversation. And like this is a building an industry conversation, not like a transactional order. Like we've seen that work time and time again pre-COVID, but we've seen people skyrocket doing the partner versus customer conversation during COVID. Only if it's true. Garrett, you don't have to interrupt me. You can't weaponize it. So anyways, I know we're running short on time already. So that was...
Yeah, I see some questions coming in. So I want to make sure we get through some of this good stuff that we jotted down. One thing that I think is worth noting, and it's related to what we're talking about just now, is shifting. It's very mindset related. If you haven't figured it out already, we're the mindset guys. So this is how we think about things. But changing the way that you think about the situation from, how can I survive? Let me think about all the things that are wrong with being virtual. Okay, now I don't get to have that face-to-face time with my customers, whatever it is, and shift the question to what are the advantages of being virtual? And we were just talking with Julie and Hannah before the webinar started here. Colin and I are going through that exact same exercise with our class at USC, because the initial narrative is, oh no, it's all virtual. I didn't sign up to go to University of Phoenix. I signed up to come to USC. Do I take a semester off? No offense to University of Phoenix people, by the way, that's the line that we got once. So, it's a major difference actually to change it and think about, okay, but what are the advantages of teaching online, or what are the advantages of selling online? So for us, on the teaching question, we found that we're able to get guest speakers that we would never be able to get to come to campus to speak to our class. And we're going to actually turn that into a really interesting exercise for this semester. There are certain things that you can do with breakout rooms and individual contributions that you actually can't do in person. So we're starting to identify all of that stuff. Same thing with the sales teams that we talk to. They're saying, okay, we're not all in the same room now, but we don't have to get on an airplane. We don't have to, spend 6 months trying to get the 5 decision makers all in the same room. We can actually do that really quickly. So, the question that I would pose to you guys and to ask yourselves and people that you trust is like, what are the advantages? Because there are some advantages to this new way of selling, or this new form of sales teams virtually.
Yeah.
And that's a big mindset one that I want to make sure we touch on before we shift over to the Q&A portion.
Yeah, and Garrett's being nice, because the reality is there's only 2 types of people during COVID. The type of people that are going to leave COVID stronger, or the type of people that are going to leave COVID not stronger. I mean, like, this is an opportunity for you to have the time to own this shit. Like, this is the time for you to, like, this. A highly emotionally intelligent person is not the person that recognizes that they wait to speak versus listen. Like, the emotional intelligent person is the person that takes the time to look in the mirror and says, damn, I wait to speak. I don't listen, right? It's the self-awareness to be able to label where you are right now. Like, we are in the middle of this shit right now, and we are going to get out. If you believe that, right? And if you believe that, you have a choice. You're either going to come out stronger because you stayed in the gym and you got to reinvent yourself, and you got to take a pointed focus and you did it right, or you're just going to figure it out and get through it on the other end. But like, if you wanted to be the person that is stronger for this situation, right? And we all have read Ryan Holiday's Obstacle is the Way. If you haven't, there's no need for you to read it because the entire book is in the title. But like, it's a really good book. Garrett doesn't like when I recommend it. I just watched a great TED Talk on self-awareness. It's the difference, Garrett said, it's the difference between asking why versus asking what. Like, why is this happening to me right now? Like, why are all my deals not closing? Like, why? And you think that you're going to get to the right answer. Unless obviously like you've had an argument with your wife or your husband before and they say something to you and then in your head you go, why is this happening? And the answer has nothing to do with the argument, right? You go down some dumb rabbit hole. And that's what happens when you ask the question why. But if you ask the question what, like what should I be doing? Like what am I not figuring out? Like what is it that's going on that I'm not seeing? Things change. So we don't have time to get into future-facing exercises and personal SWOT analysis and dissecting like your actual business intelligence data. Like we would love to be able to do that, and it would be a 3-day strategy session. But it's not cheesy. Like this is COVID. Like you have 2 options. Like you get to even the playing field or you don't. But Garrett said it. Like we're interviewing big time people that we would have never had access to. But the playing field is level now. They would never drive to USC, but they're hopping on calls with us. So the question of what versus why, I just wanted to make sure that I drove home before we.
Yeah. So I have 2 closing thoughts before, we'll leave some stuff for the next conversation, I guess, but 2 closing thoughts. One is, again, we hammer the mindset thing, but the thing that's going to make the difference while things are still crazy and uncertain, it's not a new sales tool. It's not a new sales tactic. It's not a new strategy. It's really mindset and how you're approaching the things that you and your competitors and everybody else has at their disposal. It's the way that you think about those things, and thinking about some of them in the ways that we've talked about here is definitely a start. The last thing that I wanted to point out is that as we listen to other sales speakers and even sales leaders who are teaching their teams and like, I figured it out, this stuff is working. It does seem like most of the stuff that is working great right now and these revelations that certain sales teams and sales leaders are having is the stuff that should and would have been working beforehand anyway. This is just accelerating people figuring out that, oh, I really do have to qualify a little bit harder, and I really do have to add value that much sooner, and all the kind of stuff that, again, Colin and I cringe on because it's just the typical sales training stuff. But the stuff that does work and the stuff that does have a place in every sales playbook, it's always been there. It's just getting magnified right now. And I think, our mission, I don't know, Colin, if you articulated it exactly, but Colin and I are on a mission to change the way the world feels about salespeople. We hate that when we talk to, whether we're interviewing a salesperson or not a salesperson, when we ask the question, what do you think of when we say the word salesperson? It's not usually a pretty picture, and we think it should be. And so we're trying to change that. And so, a big part of that, we hope that as things accelerate and as people start to learn these lessons, sometimes the hard way, that mission will be accelerated. But that's all I've got on this part, unless there's something you think we just absolutely shouldn't miss, Colin, before we jump into Q&A.
Just this concept of a learner mindset versus a knower mindset is really important. Like 2 people can read the same book. Like 2 of you on this webinar right now are listening to the exact same content. One of you is going to leave and say, I know this, I've got this, and you're going to fail miserably. Because when you don't have it, like, what do? The other person is going to be, okay, great. Now I'm in the pursuit of it, right? Like the learner versus the knower. Like this is an ongoing journey. And the worst salespeople that we've ever met, regardless of like what their title is, they're just knowers. And no one gravitates towards a knower. No one gravitates towards perfection. I'm not going to bring up jcrew.com, but if you went and you looked at their khakis, you'd notice that all of their cuffs are not perfect. That's because no one is perfect, but I'll get to that at another in-person speaking event.
Good restraint. I'm impressed.
I know, I tried. So here's the one thing I'll leave you with. Like, if you can be a learner and add value, you'll find it in the most weirdest of places. Like, asking questions is a form of adding value if you're asking questions that the person you're talking to doesn't know the answer. Like if you ask me a question that I don't have the answer to and you watch me ideate in real time for the first time, that was a gift that you gave me. That's a value add. But if you're asking me questions that I know the answers to so that you can gather all of your data so that then you can sell me, that's value extraction. And I know that's not what this webinar is about, but that's what we're about, right? Like we are about making sure that we can destigmatize an industry that has been rightfully stigmatized for the last 100 years because for some strange reason, everyone needs to sell something. So the bar is extremely low. We believe that the bar is actually extremely high. And when you can raise that bar and you can take into consideration mindset versus just tactics and strategy versus just execution, the whole world is different. So I'll end there.
Perfect. While Hannah is looking through questions, I do want to say, I don't know how long the questions are going to go, and people probably have to jump at 1 o'clock, but I will put our LinkedIn profiles as well as a link to our website. If anybody's interested in just kind of subscribing and keeping in touch, we are going, as I said, we're working on this book. We've been recording all these amazing interviews that we've been doing, and we're going to start to package that stuff up into content. So if you're interested in seeing what that becomes and learning some lessons from some of these amazing people that are in sales, not in sales, we've spoken with actors and artists and trial lawyers and, just all kinds of different people who sell every day, even though they don't have sales in their title. And we think it's really exciting stuff. So if you're interested, I just hit enter there and feel free to jump on and do that. No pressure. And let's get into the questions and see how this goes.
All right. So first question is, how do you sell seasonal as Christmas and Kwanzaa products year round, or should you? When is the best time to start promoting such seasonal holiday products?
I love that question. So Garrett and I say this a lot. It's borderline a tagline, which is that this is the best part of the movie. Like right now, like during the shit of it, like during the thick of it. Like we don't go to the movie to watch the last 2 minutes when like everything's okay and there's a happy ending. Like we want the drama in the middle and we want that prolonged gratification. And so I would say when it comes to seasonal selling, the anticipatory event is exceptional. Like the idea, like the best part about vacation is a week before vacation. Because who knows if you show up to the Bahamas and it's raining and COVID hits. But the week before, where you can anticipate it and you can get excited about it and you can think about what's going to happen and fall in love with the concept, like that is special. So when you talk about seasonal selling and how to get in front of it all year long, take advantage of anticipation. Take advantage of thought leadership. Be the person that asks really hard questions, okay, that they don't know the answers to. And they'll probably make something up because that's what they do, because everybody wants to save face, okay? So you ask a hard question, they don't know the answer to it, and you can be honest, and you can go, that's really interesting. Because I talk to heads of HRs every day, and I've never heard that answer before. Immediately, you're a thought leader, even though it's another buzzword that we hate to say. Like immediately now you hold all the information of what her entire industry and her competitors like have in their head and like what their strategies are. So if you've never heard that before, what are you hearing? Position yourself as that person, leverage the anticipation, and be the thought leader that lets others know, well, the greatest in the game are doing this. And obviously this would be getting in front of seasonal all year long.
All right. Our next question is, the company I work for is reaching out to industries we have never attempted to reach out to before. I find that when calling them, we are seen as another attempt to make a sale using COVID. Personally, I think we are calling the wrong industries and should focus on another that has shown more interest. This other interest is understanding, and I can be more real with them. Do I follow direction because yes, this job is now how I pay my bills? Or do I continue to follow my gut because it makes my job a lot more fun and failure in something I want or I went for is more thrilling?
That's such an existential end. That's not where I thought that question was going, but I like it. So there's a couple different things here. One is, and it requires, I guess, a conversation that we can't have in this format, but is the reason that the industry that your company wants you to sell to, is the reason that they're not buying because it's not a fit, or because you just don't know enough about the customer and their pain point and how you solve it yet? Have you not learned enough? And the reason I ask that question is because a couple times in these interviews that Colin and I have done with salespeople, you know, a lot of times Colin and I in our normal teaching, we talk a lot about purpose and motivation and what motivates the best salespeople. And what we started to find is that the best salespeople have this catalyst. And multiple times we've heard these stories where they've gone into a room and been completely humiliated because they just didn't have enough information about the industry they were selling to or the company they were selling to. And they came out of there with that frustration, that shame, whatever you want to call it, after that conversation. And that was like the moment where they're like, I'm going to learn everything I possibly can about that industry so that never happens again. So I don't know if that's the case. I don't know enough about your business and what you're selling to know if that's the case with the industry that your company wants you to sell to. But maybe it's just a matter of, you got to get in there and really learn about those particular customers to see if it fits. But if you do, that said, if you do have a different industry where you are seeing some success and that's where you're passionate about, I mean, it certainly can't hurt to at least have a little side hustle to try to prove your point. I don't know what the dynamic is between you and management and the executives and things like that. But, you know, you get a couple wins and I'm sure you can change their mind with numbers. That often works.
Yeah, I don't disagree with Garrett. I think that there's a lot to unpack in this question. I would love to meet you because I'm sure that there's a lot to unpack in general when it comes to sales and your journey. But here's what I will tell you. Like some of the greatest salespeople that we've encountered, like this is a quote we just pulled from it. Every job I've been at has been the greatest job I've ever had. Like that's a quote that we heard, like from someone who's obviously hyper like aware and also hyper grateful and probably, you know, does a lot more personal development than any of us want to admit to. Okay. But if you think about that, right, this is the same person that told us the best advice he ever got was to stay new. So he was giving this example to us about how like all of these other salespeople that were selling to the same demographic as him, okay, were failing miserably. And they would come to him and they would go, oh, these leads are so shitty. Like anytime we get a lead from this territory or from this vertical, like they just never buy. Like why do they keep giving us these leads? And this guy goes, that's why I don't look at where the leads come from. Novel idea. If you think about how genius that actually is, regardless of if he knows it or not, he's self-aware enough to know that he will fall into the same trap. So therefore, don't give me background. Like, give me the opportunity to treat this person just as fairly as if I would if I didn't know they came from a different industry or from a different geographical territory. So like it's not to negate anything that Garrett said. Like, listen, like from a strategic perspective, like there's definitely an opportunity for you to go and prove out your case and maybe turn into a manager. But from an assassin, like from an executor, from a sales executive, account executive like perspective, you sell whoever's in front of you and you love it. And if you don't love it, then that's the real crux of this conversation, is how do you fall in love with this new subset of this demographic? And that's a really hard question, and we don't have enough time to answer it. But I will tell you, it's a lot easier to fall in love with the concept of someone before you meet them than it is to try to look for the good once you've met someone and you don't like them. So that's a lot. We don't have time to unpack it, but I think there's a lot more here and here than there is just tactically trying to vet out and A/B test different territories. You're laughing at me, Garrett.
I'm just laughing because I wish we could get into logic and emotion.
I know.
Colin personifies the emotion and I personify the logic, and that's why we love to work together, because we're going to come at these problems from completely different angles and end up at the same place.
And let me be vulnerable, right? Let me be vulnerable for both of us. This is a really hard webinar for us to do because we can't talk to you. We only have an hour, so we can't talk to you about like what we think makes a great salesperson. We have to limit it to what's inside of COVID. So for another time.
All right, next question is, I need to sell my services as a composer and a music producer. I know I need a lot of confidence for this to basically sell myself and my abilities. Any help on how to build this confidence? I'm also open to any other insights you may have in selling your own abilities and skill sets using creativity.
This is a good one, probably a good one for the emotion guy, but I will say that I will point out that we do a lot of work with artists because there's this old study that was done where if something has a story attached to it, if you've crafted the story around it really well, then it sells for, what was it, Colin, like 320% more in that one experiment or something crazy like that. So we help creative people and artists specifically to craft their stories and how to share their journey in their art, but also the stories of each individual art piece. So I think there's a real opportunity there for you as a creative person to kind of craft your story in a way that you're excited to share it, because there's an old sales cliche that telling isn't selling. The best salespeople know this. They're selling not through telling facts, but through telling stories and through asking questions. And so if you can craft a story that gets you excited and that you're excited to share and that's interesting for other people to hear, you'll be selling without even realizing yourself that you're selling it. You'll feel a lot better and a lot different. And the person that you're talking to will respond differently.
Yeah, that's good. I will take the emotional aspect. And by the way, like, this is our dream question that we also don't have enough time for, but this is like, we're talking about confidence, right? And you're right. Like, if you don't show up and blow up, then you're just like everyone else, right? Like, you have to have some key differentiator, and sometimes it's got to be more than just your product. So what I will tell you is, I say that a lot. I got to chill out on that.
Mm-hmm.
I was not on purpose.
He's talking to himself out
But that
loud.
was not on purpose. I just realized it, and now it's happening. So here's an activity that we do with our students that works out really well, because students, we're going to graduate USC, and we have them all over the place. They're now at Amazon and Google and Ring DNA, and they're great. But they have this fear, this imposter syndrome that Garrett does a great like half an hour on, from all the stuff that was at Google when he was there. But long story short, there's something called an opposite actionable statement, which is you're concerned that you are going to sound like some punk, fresh out of college kid trying to reach out to Jeff Bezos, and you're just not on the same level and you're not worthy. And that's a story that you're telling yourself. The opposite actionable statement to that would be, at some point, every Fortune 500 CEO was a punk, fresh out of college or similar age demographic kid. And all of a sudden you're like, oh shit, like, he might actually love me, because what did he do when he was 22, right? Or another one that I had a huge issue with was asking for the money, right? Like, I told you my story. Like, I hated traditional salespeople because they were just sleazy and slimy to me. So like, my biggest fear, I'd crush relationships, right? I could vibe out all day with you until I had to ask you for money. And then I just felt like a sleazy salesperson. And so the opposite actionable statement for me was, if they bring up money first, you're going to sound like a sleazy salesperson, Colin. And that was it. I never had a problem talking about money again, because if I didn't talk about money and they did, it would have looked to me, the story I'm telling myself, like I have something to hide. Or, right, a more cheesier version of that would be like, I don't want to bring up money. I'm scared to look horrible. And the opposite of that is, I can't help them unless I bring up money. So anyways, opposite actionable statements, just get real on what you're actually concerned about, and then just figure out what the opposite is.
What suggestions do you have for a small team of only a few people that are trying to pivot a company from our normal industries, all being hit drastically by the pandemic? We are calling new potentials, but only have a few people able to, and don't have much money to spend on marketing.
This is a perfect use case for the vulnerability spiel that Colin gave earlier, where, because everybody, in some way or another, everybody has been impacted by what's going on right now, whether it's financially, emotionally, probably all of the above. And so if you are, the way I hear your question, and so the way I'm going to answer it is, what do we do as we're to explore new industries and new potential customers? without a budget and while we're being hit financially because our existing customer base isn't around. And so I think, being able to call this new cohort of customers and explain the situation and lead with that, like, here's what we do. Here's our typical customers where we've thrived and we look forward to serving them someday. We see this as an opportunity to talk to new customers in new industries, and we've identified you for whatever reason. Go into that actual story and then just ask them what they think. So Colin's very fond of saying, ask for advice, get money, ask for money, get advice. This is a great opportunity to ask for some advice and hopefully get it from some sympathetic potential customers, and learn those lessons fast. Have those conversations as often as you can, because if you're not a fit for that industry, you definitely don't want to be spinning your wheels there any longer than you have to.
That was borderline emo of you. Logical.
You're rubbing off on me.
Yeah. The one thing I will add is Garrett brought up sympathy, which is a good word to bring up, and there's a very clear distinction between sympathy and empathy. And when we talk about empathy, like, we don't focus so much on the act, we focus on the byproduct of empathy, okay? So the byproduct of empathy should be the person you're talking to feels understood. And so if you're talking to this new subset of potential customers and they feel understood, okay, that's a step in the right direction, because that's way different than selling. Like, that, it just is, it's not the same thing. So I want to compartmentalize that because we could go on a tangent there. The other point is, think of a buying line in the middle of the screen, okay? So there's a buying line. This is a yes, this is a no. Your job is to eventually get someone on the yes side of the buying line, no matter what. And then pragmatically figure out a way to make it come true. So sometimes, right, like, what you need is just a yes, right? You just got to break the curse, right? So it's like, you got to get him on the buying line no matter what. I mean, listen, I remember having a conversation with someone that Garrett and I were consulting for, and he did a very eloquent job of saying, okay, so it sounds like you don't want this, or you don't want to pay for this. But, like, if it was $100, not $100,000, you'd obviously buy it, right? And the person laughed because they liked the person, okay? And that's very important, by the way. Like, that's huge. Like, that you actually did a good job, like, being on the same team, or they respect the person. And so they responded by saying, sure, Jason, if it's $100, you got me. But now we're on the right side of the buying line, right? So now what does Jason do? And this is when Jason goes, well, obviously I can't do that, but here's what we can do. Okay, so there's that. And then one more is third-party stories. Like, you're just not going to sell a new demographic if you're not familiar with the new demographic, okay? So you're going to need someone that's familiar with the demographic to sell for you. So when you're talking to someone, you're being honest and you're being vulnerable and you've got your first sales, reflect on the first sale and tell them, I get it. I mean, I'm not you. I'm not 67 in Minnesota and a CTO, but I get it. The reason I get it is because you remind me of one of my customers with the same challenges, with the same issues. And so here's what we did to take a phased approach to making sure that the comfort level was there. We did X, Y, Z. Now they're one of my best customers. And if you want, you can talk to them, because I'm really bad at bragging about myself. So there's a bunch of tactics. We can't get into them. But anyways, buying line, third-party stories, and then there's a whole bunch of mindset stuff we don't have time for.
A quick comment before the next question. It says that Colin's LinkedIn page is not working. Provided in the chat. So just an FYI there.
When Colin's off on his next tangent, I will see what's going on with that.
Sounds good.
Colin's LinkedIn isn't working?
This next one's kind of fun, so I thought I'd ask it. It says, I've interviewed 100 executives over the past 3 years on when their life went downhill. How can I use this info to sell my collected knowledge?
Can you repeat that again?
Yes. I've interviewed 100 executives over the past 3 years on when their life went downhill. How can I use this info to sell my collected knowledge?
I've interviewed a bunch of executives on when their life went down.
I have so many questions before I can even answer this.
If you asked me that, I wouldn't know how to answer that question. But I think, okay, so I'm going to take a first stab at this. And by the way, my LinkedIn is working. So Garrett's probably trying to sabotage me by putting in the wrong LinkedIn address.
Garrett's LinkedIn is also not working.
Oh, I see why. It's here.
I'll start talking.
It's coming up as both of our the links are connected. So you got to delete his. Here, I'll just put them in separately. Watch this. You answer that question, Colin, and I'll get everybody straightened out here.
Okay, so the way that I would leverage that information, not knowing what you sell or why you're trying to leverage that information, is there is a very relevant connection that Garrett and I talk a lot about looking for the good and finding it. So if you look for the good, you'll find it. If you look for the bad, you'll find it. It just is what it is, right? The brain is malleable. It's going to find evidence to support whatever you're looking for. We can get into the science, and Garrett would love it, but I'm not going to. So if you're interviewing people and asking them to look for the bad, right, then they're finding it. And I think, I have no idea what you're selling, but let's just assume that there's some corollaries there. There's a great exercise about your timeline. Okay, where it's personal and professional. We do it with our teams a lot. Like maybe you guys want to do it with your team or with your customers, where you only have 10 data points on the personal side and 10 data points on the professional side. And the goal is from -10 to +10. So on a scale from -10 to +10, what are the 10 most impactful moments in your professional life? From age 0 to age whatever they are, let's say 54. And so it forces them, right, to take 10 moments in time that were the most impactful for them professionally. And impactful doesn't mean positive, right? So like your biggest failure is a -10. And that came at 27 when you got fired right before Google IPO'd, right? Like that was -10, okay? But then now that they're 54, right, at age 32, they're going to tell you something that's a +10 that was really impactful. And that conversation will ultimately lead to a very weird one, which is, I'm so grateful that that shitty moment happened to me, right? Back to the obstacle is the way. Do you know how many, I mean, Garrett and I are very close in age. We're not the same age, but we're close in age. You know how many people in our age demographic can turn around now and say that they were grateful for the Great Recession back in the 2000s? And like, if that recession didn't happen, I would have never been forced to move to the Bay. If I was never forced to move to the Bay, then I would have never ultimately moved back home in a group of kids that were out of my comfort zone because all of my friends already moved together when I moved to the Bay. And if I didn't live in that house, I wouldn't have met my roommate, and my roommate introduced me to my wife, and my wife just gave me my entire world, right? Like my 2 kids, like the best part of my day. That would have not happened. So I think that there is a great conversation to be had leveraging looking for the bad. I just, I would love to know why you're asking that question, and I'll just say, do the looking for the good too. Did you fix our LinkedIn, Garrett?
Links should be fixed.
Okay.
Please stay in touch. We would love to. This is always weird for us when we can't see or interact with the people that we're talking to. So we would love to hear from you guys.
Yeah, whoever asked that question, please LinkedIn one of us.
All right, I think we have time for one more question. So it is, any advice for getting the attention of a business executive who initially showed tremendous interest in working with us on a project pre-pandemic, but who now isn't answering any emails or calls? That's it.
You know it.
What's that?
I think we go pizza, right? Let's end with a bang. Let's end with a pizza bet.
Go for it. Don't set me up to screw it up like I did last time.
Always make fun of me for talking too much, and then I'm lobbing you remember empathy, okay? Like, if you have empathy for this person, then you understand them, right? Like you feel understood, but you also understand them. So if you can honestly say that, right? Like if you know, like you vibed out with this person prior to COVID, right? Like it was like a real connection. It doesn't have to be emotional connection, just like in terms of a business need, use case connection. And then they disappeared and you tried several times. You just need to remind them that you're not just a commodity. Like you need to remind them that whatever you're selling, there's 100 different versions of it, more than likely. And they're actually not buying the product for the product. They're thinking in their head, I'm going to have to spend time with one of these salespeople for the next, I don't know how many years, months, or days. I'd rather hang out with her. Okay? So when you can acknowledge that and did a good enough job being a human being first and a salesperson second, and you knew that there was a deal to be had and then they just ghosted you, we have this pizza bet email that works really, really well, which is you send your email and the subject line is wager. And it says, you're obviously busy. I'll make my last attempt worth your while. I know you're in the Bay. NBA just started. If the Warriors beat the Raptors tonight, I will send you a large pizza to your home or your office, and I'll never reach out to you again. But if the Warriors lose, you got to give me 20 minutes, just hop on the phone, and I promise you, if after that 20 minutes, it's a no, we will part as friends, and I still won't reach out to you again. We had a pizza bet budget back at Bidian. You're not going to be able to answer this, so it's rhetorical, but I'll ask it anyways. How many people do you actually think said, I'll take the free pizza? Like 3. Like 3 out of thousands. Like every response was the same. Like, I'm sorry. I appreciate the creativity. Like, I'm an asshole. Like, it is amazing what people will respond to when you just are different. So the pizza bet's a great way to like just engage.
We're out of time, but I will say this. We had a student use that pizza bet to get an interview with a founder of a company that he kind of idolized. And the founder ended up tweeting a picture of the email out and saying something about the hustle, and it got retweeted thousands of times. Chris Sacca retweeted it, and it became a whole thing. So that does work in a variety of capacities. People just want to be, sometimes they just need you to rise above the noise because things are going on. You obviously have to be empathetic and appreciate what they may be going through and leave room for that. But that's a great creative kind of harmless way to do something and get a response. And it doesn't have to be the pizza bet, but think outside the box like that. And our book will contain more ideas that we've heard from some amazing people on that. Because, there are people that are coming up with creative stuff like that all the time.
And that's the best part of the movie. Like that. You will be grateful. You'll be grateful that they said no to you and you had to resort to the pizza bet, and you'll get it. You will get that deal.
That's awesome, guys. Thank you so much. We really appreciate all your super relevant and powerful insights today. I think everyone's looking forward to that 3-part in-person series, and especially your book. Thanks so much for your time. We're a little bit over time, so I'm going to let everybody get back to their day, but a copy of the slides, or well, no slides, but a copy of the recording, it'll be sent tomorrow. And we'll plan to present these additional webinars, hopefully in the near future. Thanks so much again, Colin and Garrett. We really appreciate your time, and wish we could shake your hand in person, but we'll look forward to doing so soon. We're here to help you and your business make it through this crisis. So thank you everyone for joining us today. Stay safe and healthy. Thanks again.
Bye, guys.